Good morning, friends, and welcome. Theosophia, or God wisdom, is always in the world. Parts of it can be found in modern religion, science, and philosophy. As theosophy, or theosophia, provides the foundation for all three. The modern theosophical movement was brought out in the 19th century by H.P. Blavatsky. Co-founder William Q. Judge consistently supported the message and the messenger. The United Lodge of Theosophists was founded in 1909 to pass on the message as HPB and William Q. Judge passed it on to us. As is indicated in the complete declaration on the back of our quarterly program, the policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. ULT welcomes to its association all who are in accord with its declared purposes. All are encouraged to test every part of the message against their own intuition. And the laws of nature also test them against that. And to make theosophy a living power in their lives. May each of us study, help, and teach others and assimilate. The ULT and Washington, D.C. students gather here at Suite 230, 4865A Cordell Avenue in Bethesda, Maryland, every Sunday at 11 a.m. to discuss a particular topic or to have a roundtable discussion. It could be a talk or a roundtable. We also have study classes every first and third Sunday at 12:30 p.m. where we are now reading and discussing the ocean of theosophy. You can get more information on our website at www.ultdc.org, or way better yet, by coming to our meetings, which are open to all. Each lodge being sustained by students to the degree they make commitments to themselves only. There are no admission charges, and the only tie that binds us is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching. Our reading today is from the Voice of the Silence, starting on page 5. Saith the great law, in order to become the knower of all self, thou hast first to self to become the knower. To reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give up self to non-self, being to non-being, and then thou canst repose between the wings of the great bird. Sweet is rest between the wings of that which is not born nor dies, but is the Om throughout ages. Bestride the bird of life, if thou wouldst know. Give up thy life, if thou wouldst live. 3 halls, O weary pilgrim, lead to the end of toils. 3 halls, O conqueror of Mara, will bring thee through 3 states, into the 4th, and thence into the 7 worlds, the worlds of rest eternal. If thou wouldst learn their names, then hearken and remember. The name of the first hall is ignorance, or avidya. It is the hall in which thou sawest the light, and in which thou livest and shall die. The name of hall the second is the hall of learning. In it thy soul will find the blossoms of life, but under every flower a serpent coiled. The name of the third hall is wisdom, beyond which stretch the shoreless waters of Akshara, the indestructible fount of omniscience. Next week's talk is on the life principle at this same time, next Sunday. And now for today's talk on sleep and dreams.
This is a two-part talk, and the student another student will present the particulars of it. Today is a general covering of the topic on her behalf. This is a very pronounced subject. It's very prominent in the sense that in the ordinary scientific parlance, sleep is acknowledged because we all go through it. We all dream. This is also acknowledged. But it is, according to the scientific field, it's simply brain activity. We will see that that is not the case according to the theosophical teachings. Now, for the newcomers in this room today, I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with the principles that theosophy propounds. And we will put them up here. The spirit, spiritual soul, mind. Now, in this teaching, these three principles are the ones that go from life to life, because reincarnation and karma being part of this teaching. So this is the permanent part of us. Permanent principles. And in the theosophical writings, this is referred to as the higher ego. And there are 4 other principles which are the lower, and this is what drops off at the end of one life span, which is about 100 years. And those are the astral body, the physical body, the life principle, and our passions and desires. In this philosophy, passions and desires constitute a separate principle. So, 4 lower drop off at death, what is called death. And I will put them here because we will see that this 4 affects what the other 3 can instill into us. We'll start from the top. Passions and desires. Jiva, which is the life principle. Then the astral body. This is the ethereal part. And on this model, the physical body is built. Sorry, physical body. Okay. Now, when we go to sleep, where are we? How do we go to sleep? What principle is working? How do we dream? All these are very relevant because it is stated that those who wish to learn to control these 4 need to understand the 3 that the diurnal cycle of Earth provides for us. And what is that? 24 hours. We go through a cycle and we live in 3 different aspects. And the first student read it. It's on page 6. She says, HPB says, the 3 states of consciousness, which are Jagarta, the waking, swapna, the dreaming, and sushupti, the deep sleeping state. These 3 yogic conditions lead to the 4th, And she calls that turiya, which is the highest spiritual consciousness. So we live, I'm going to have to take it off, sorry. So our consciousness and what? The state of matter that corresponds with it is relevant to one of these states. Waking consciousness, dreaming consciousness, and what's the other one? Deep sleep. Now, in theosophy, the sleep is separated into two parts. In one, we dream. In the other one, it is dreamless. But Mr. Judge says that classification is really inadequate, but we will go into it a little bit later. So we have to remember that these states we go through every single day. Why? Because the higher ego, the divine soul, knows what it is doing. It goes from one level of consciousness to the next, until we reach the highest level of consciousness. But are we aware of it? Why are we not aware of it? Because the physical brain, which is the organ of the mind, falls asleep sort of at night. Once the lower aspects are quiet, this is when the three become active. What happens? If you have looked at the constitution of the brain, it has two different parts. There's a cerebellum in the back, which is in charge of all of the physical activity. And the frontal lobe is the later developed aspect of the brain, which is involved in the higher aspect of thought, the thinking principle, in other words. What is cerebellum doing during the day? The threshold for this organ or part of the brain is lower during the day, so the other parts overtake, but it is at all times, she says, active. Every hour of the day and every hour of the night, this principle is active. But when the threshold of the frontal lobes go below the threshold of the cerebellum, this becomes active. What is it? It's the animal center of the human economy. Oops. It's the animal center of the human economy. So now we're going to discuss the levels of consciousness and how we move from one to the other. During the day, what are we involved? Living. We think, we make decisions, we go about our business. Every one of us is in this situation. We live every day. Just like the 100-year cycle of the human incarnation cycle, there is a prominent theme or ideology that takes precedence of all others. In other words, what is the life energy concentrated on for that 100 years? Each one of us have that in us. There's a goal we are working towards. This is internal to each human being. Perhaps we don't express it to the outside world, but nevertheless it's in there. And sometimes the reflection of that is the outer, sometimes it is not. So at the end of the 100 years, it is stated that the soul is shown like a movie as to what happened during that life. It goes through everything and understands why the events happened the way they did, because the soul is responsible. And when it awakes again from that sleep called the Devakanic interlude or heaven, it again goes through a similar process and looks at the life in a general way as to what it is going to do in the forthcoming 100 years, say, or 70 years, however the duration might be. And it understands and knows that it is just according to karmic law. It is just because justice rules the world. And it understands it. Now, what is implied in these teachings is that that diurnal cycle of 24 hours, the human soul has that same capability of looking at what happened during this 24 hours or the 12-hour period that we live through, and puts it to the test of the soul as to which is it that it is in accord with its divine nature and which is it not, and discards. In other words, you have the ability to discard what you do not wish to take to sleep with you. This is our choice. Why is this very important? Because what we are going to do in these fields or levels of consciousness is going to be affected by the animal center. Why? Because first we go through the astral life. And in death, it is the same thing. We go through the astral first, which is called kamaloka, because the kamic principle coalesces and it becomes just that animal center. Except it doesn't have the higher ego's influence on it, so it has freedom to act as it pleases. It does exactly the same thing while we are trying to fall asleep, because the frontal lobes are not in ascendancy. The cerebellum is in ascendancy. This is the animal economy center, but it is very active. So if you give it voice, then your stay in the astral region is going to be extended. But she says, those who are pure of heart and cleansing themselves continually pass into the dreaming state without being affected too much by the astral light. Why is astral light so very dangerous? Because it records everything that each human being thinks and does. This is the recording aspect of the universe. Everything we do and everything we think is recorded. And what is similar to your thought will be then implanted into you while you're going through it. And your waking consciousness will be very much affected by it. So, Mr. Judge says, it is very, very necessary to understand that these three states constitute a 24-hour period and that we must learn to control it. Very interesting statement. How many of us have controlled our lives on the physical plane? And now we are going to add other aspects to it. But it is very necessary. He says, until we do, we will not be able to receive the beneficent effect that the spiritual world exerts on us. So, say we are doing what is recommended, that we cleanse the animal nature and we don't take those aspects that need not be inclusive of our sleeping state, and then we pass into the dreaming state. Where is the dreaming state taking place? Astral world. But please remember, each one of these principles have 7 different levels, and the highest being the spiritual and the lowest being the least basically physical, because it's next to the physical world. And it is called nefarious. This is not my word. I had to look it up. Nefarious world is the astral world. In dreaming state, then, we are dreaming. Why? Because the influence that the 2 higher principles exert are shifted down to our physical brain. But if the physical brain is obtuse, it's not going to receive these impressions from the higher aspect of us very clearly. And if the animal nature is active, that is also going to affect it. So HPV says, confusion made even worse because no clarity would be there. However, once that we know how to control the state that we just talked about, and we move into the dreaming world, and we are in accord with our divine side of our nature, the impressions coming into it would be clearer. Why is this important? Because we are living the life of the ego. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we are not the personality. The personality is the ephemeral aspect that drops off at death. So we are living the soul life of us. So we need to understand what the soul is imparting to us. What kind of language does it use? Allegorically speaking, it's metaphysical. So it is in glyphs and geometrical shapes that it would impart us that information. So if you are in the higher levels of your existence and you retain that dream, it has a tremendous application to our day life. And the spiritual soul, what does it exert towards us? Wisdom. Because everything that we have done and everything everybody else has done is the communal property of each human soul. We can access that information at will, except that our will is not active when we're in sleep. And the consciousness that we experience in the spiritual world, Mr. Judge puts it this way, and I would like to share this statement with you. He says, dreamless sleep is inadequate, for while it is dreamless, it is also a state in which even criminals commune through the higher nature with the spiritual beings and enter into the spiritual plane. It is the great spiritual reservoir by means of which the tremendous momentum towards evil living is held in check, and because it is involuntary with them, it is constantly salutary in its effect. So the gods impart this on us. Our aim should be to carry through the salutary effects of sushupti into Jagarta, sushupti being the sleep, the dreamless sleep, into our day life, our ordinary waking condition. Thus all men pass through and live upon three planes of life and consciousness every time the earth marks one revolution upon its axis. So here it is, the salutary effect of this field needs to be brought down to earth. What would it do? It would guide as to what we do during our waking consciousness, because we would know what the purpose of the soul is. And that is our real life. We are here to express the soul nature and not let the animal center interfere with it to such a degree that we don't hear or see what the higher aspect is sifting down to us. There are a few examples that this student had shared with the student body here, but we won't go into it because I am sure every one of you have had such experiences. So dreams then are important because there are retrospective dreams, and if we don't have direct perception, what are we relying on to know them? Our memory, which is partial because of the effect of the lower aspect. Then there are prospective dreams in which events, persons, landscapes with minutest detail is put in front of us, and you make sure that it is there when you wake up because it has such significance to you. And when you in actual life see it or experience it, you say, wow, I had experienced that in my dream. The soul was imparting to you some knowledge or essential information for you to make a decision upon. And then there are other problems, such as mathematical, abstract, and personal problems, and you put it to your higher self and ask for, say, assistance, and day in, day out, nothing is there. And then you wake up one morning and you have the problem solved in your mind. You have the solution in your mind. Whatever it was that you were putting a little attention to is solved while you're in sleep. While your brain is not active, what is active is the ego. Now, we discussed 3 levels of consciousness here alone, right? So, are there 3 egos in us? Certainly not. These are aspects of the one ego, the divine ego in us. Now, it is important to talk about the aspects, but we are a unit and we're not separate principles wandering around. So we need to also metaphysically put it together so that we don't get confused. Because HPV says it is extremely important to understand that there are not 3 egos, but 3 aspects, but one divine ego who is living through all of the different consciousnesses or levels of consciousness we go through. And how many are there? We just listed 7 principles. Each 7 is divided into another 7, so she calls them 49 fires in the secret doctrine. It is this that makes us higher than the animals, because we are self-conscious. Self-conscious. Here it is stated by Judge. He says, one of the chief objects of the science of devotion, devotion to the higher self, in other words, all our activity is based on that higher aspect of us, that we have assumed the position of altruistic living. In the Gita, it is to obtain control over the lower nature. The first step in the attainment of such control is dependent upon an understanding of the nature of life during sleep and waking, and their effects upon one another for good and for evil. So, the higher ego lives on all those planes. It is not asleep. The brain is asleep, but the higher ego, where is the higher ego's life? It is only on the buddhi. Buddhi is a spiritual soul. Buddhi manasic plane. Mind. This is mind. What kind of mind? The divine mind. Now, physical science does not go to these aspects. The human mind, for the newcomers especially, works in 2 modes. When it is in a physical body, it uses the sense organs of the body to obtain information about the universe it lives in. And then it passes to the brain, and the brain then correlates and assimilates and synthesizes. But it is the mind's tool. The mind is above the brain being its physical organ. So the mind then is the key here. It works in 2 ways. It has a higher aspect and a lower aspect. And this is the divine in us, because it is working with that. So its divine aspect and the wisdom that comes from the Buddhic aspects, when joined together, makes of us what? Living gods. But the conjunction has to be permanent. But in those students who are struggling with this constantly to understand it, to apply it to daily life, and to make it in accord with the higher aspects, it awakens to life. It's not permanent, but it awakens to life. And if we follow this process in falling to sleep, it can then sift information, which is really knowledge down for the human being to use during the daytime. And here it says, we can see the importance of mental and psychic adjustment before entering the land of dreams. While the whole of waking state will determine the nature of the dreaming and dreamless sleep states, just as the whole manner of life led will determine the nature of the after-death states, it is taught that the last moments before death are of special significance, and likewise, moments before sleep have the same significance. And I wanted to read a little bit from HPB. This is from HPB. She says, those who would feel inclined to see three egos in man, and what levels were we talking about? The astral, the manasic, and the spiritual, right? These three levels. Three egos in one man will show themselves unable to perceive the metaphysical meaning. The metaphysical meaning is that you synthesize the parts given into a whole. Man is a trinity composed of body, soul, and spirit, but man is nevertheless one, and surely it is not the body. It is the latter which is the property. The body then is the property, the transitory clothing of the man. The three egos are man in his three aspects on the astral, intellectual or psychic, and spiritual planes or states. It is in dreamless sleep that the highest aspect, which is an inseparable part of man's very self, lives and functions, and free from the trammels of the lower vehicles. She tells us the higher ego is pure essence. It does not belong to the earth field. It cannot have an existence on the earth field. It is these sheaths or vehicles that it assumes in order to have an existence on earth, and it sifts that beneficence through these fields to the brain when the brain is able, partially at least, to receive it and retain it. And when we have awoken, we feel this tremendous comfort that we are adjusted, we are composed, and we are harmonious. And it becomes our responsibility to go through the day holding on to that thread. This is also called the thread doctrine. Thread. And she says, once you have found it, never ever let it go. It's your salvation, all and many, many lives that we're going to go through. Each incarnation, if you hold the thread, it will show you what the purpose of your coming is, and you will be able to adjust your life to it better. Well, we're going to stop here. This is a very vast subject. This is just general background, and the other student is going to go into the particulars. This is what it was decided for today. So, if you have any questions, we will answer them. Yes?
Could you explain again the thread doctrine?
The thread doctrine? The thread doctrine is called This is the word they use in the writing, sutratman. And I am not trying to put Sanskrit terms on the board, but she says that the Sanskrit terms are the ones that the inner ego and its faculties correspond with it because of the vibratory mantramic effect it has, that these do not really have equivalence in English. But thread is the closest it comes. What is the ego, this higher ego, the divine ego in us? Is it not the thread? What would you assume it to be? Because it goes from life to life to life. Not only that, but it goes from the waking to dream to sleep. It is there. It is an entity and it is there. Its essence, its divine essence, is one with the logoic center. It comes from that initial impulse given into the universe as light energy. That's its essence. It's a ray, it's an immaculate ray that comes from that center. In each of us, this ray or thread exists. She says that it is our non-believing in it that it shuts it off. In other words, just like a materialist at the end of death will not go into the spiritual world because he doesn't believe in it. He shuts it off. And in between two incarnations, he will not have that rest, the Devakanic rest, but it will sleep a dreamless sleep. In other words, it's totally shut off. And it will come back and have to struggle again to regain the knowledge of this thread. Because if we don't acknowledge its presence, it is not of this world. It cannot come in. We have to prepare the lower aspects and accept that beneficent influence that it exerts on the levels of consciousness that we can benefit from. So the thread is the divine soul. It's the divine ego. Yes, Dupree?
Somewhere throughout the literature, I've read where persons can send other people dreams.
Yeah.
That's in that category list. And then also, in that same chapter, it talks about how a person can extract information from an individual while they are dreaming. That's so that seems like it's an evasion of space. You know, your how you say your personal space there. Well, how does that occur? That a person can extract, information from you, or even send you a dream if you are in those higher levels and sort of protected there, or are you on those higher levels?
But there's a process you follow every night when you're going to sleep, do you not? We just talked about it, that the astral level being the nefarious aspect. Who else is in the astral field? It is electromagnetic, it is subtle, but it's there. Okay, we in Theosophy don't really mention the negative side of life very often, but it exists. She says in many places, but not like at the forefront of her statements, that, for instance, when we did the 5 messages, she says the forces that work with us as well as those forces which work against us. She mentions it. So if they're on earth, would they be missing from the astral light? And if your animalistic nature is in the ascendancy and you haven't learned to control it, would they not be able to impart images into you, into your brain? Because you wouldn't know that you were in sleep, because this is what it does. The the dreaming state is spent in the astral region. So if it is put into your brain, can you stop it if you haven't learned how to cut it off? Okay, she calls that, what does she call it? Black magic. So those brothers of the shadow do exist. And why would they want theosophy to be popular in the universe? Why would they want us to become independent thinkers, not be fed by dogma, but become individual thinkers and following this path become beneficent individuals for what? For moving humanity into the minefield where everyone learns to control their lower aspects and becoming active in the Buddhi monastic plane become essential forces for moving humanity forward. We are not little sinful human beings. Our spiritual progenitors are Dhyani Chohans. They are planetary spirits. We come from them. This divine soul is a thread from that logoic center, and that is what we need to learn and acknowledge in ourselves. So they can put those ideas. There are some people, they say, God told me to kill him. Now, which God? Where is God? Inside of my heart. My astral heart has this essence in it. But if I'm not open to its images that it sends in the symbological language or geometrical figures, however that is imparted, how do you interpret what is being said even to you? It's not the same. So first we have to learn to control this aspect, and when we see the dream, one sign, for instance, came to this student in dream, and I retained it. I woke up with the sign imprinted in my mind. For 6 months, I searched for the sign. I couldn't find it anywhere. So what is that? That's the learning process. But I was doing a research for a particular topic, and it popped up in that research. In some book, it showed up totally irrelevant to what I thought I had seen, but nevertheless, it had a tremendous significance in what it imparted, and it came out in that research. So each one of us go through these states every night, and believe it or not, the higher self is influencing us. But we have to allow the influence to come in. Yes?
As a quick follow-up, have you or did you come across anything that would explain sleepwalking from a theosophical point of view? You know, the individual has gone to sleep, but yet they come up with this idea of sleepwalking. The physical vesture is actually up and about.
I don't remember, this student doesn't remember seeing anything about it, but what does she say about all of these states of experience that we go through? She says, whether it is God wisdom that is being imparted, or what the alcoholic inebriated experiences, or the hallucination of the insane, she says they're one and the same principle in action. That is very difficult for this student, by the way, to accept because of the background I was raised in. And that's where it comes from. It comes from the same energy in you. And what is it trying to teach you? This student does not know a particular answer to your question, but she says all of these stages that we go through are all the same. It's somewhere in here. Because this student found it extremely difficult to accept that statement. But if we are going to accept the philosophy, we either accept all of it or none of it, because all and everything is synthetic into a whole, and bits and pieces of it will not be much of beneficence to us. Where is that? Here, your question, the previous question we'll answer first. This is HPB. It, the astral light, becomes in and for man, if at all psychic, and which one of us is not, a tempting demon, an evil angel, and the inspirer of all our worst deeds. It acts on the will of even the sleeping man through visions impressed on his slumbering brain, which visions must not be confused with the dreams of the ego, and these germs bear their fruit when he awakes. So that answers that question, that they can put those visions into your brain. Now, where's the other one? Because she does say it. I saw it somewhere in here.
The sleepwalking includes talking in your sleep as well.
Yep, all of it is an exhibition of that internal power, but it's trying to tell you something. Because when, sorry, who had a, I will come right back. Because this student questioned it, even in psychology class. Used to say, how do we know that this abnormal state is actually not a state? Because if the person has experienced it and it is real to them, what right do I have to say they didn't experience it because I am not able to experience it? Because look at all these levels of consciousness we have. 7 divided into 49. So, Dupree, that's a partial answer, but this student does not have a specific answer.
I just wondered if you could provide a reference for the idea that we have to accept all of the philosophy or none of the philosophy.
Because it is stated that it is a synthetic whole that was given by the masters of wisdom. And to think that it was given to be developed would be not in line with the masters' philosophy, because they are the knowers of this wisdom religion, wisdom science, and they imparted it to us as a beneficent, what's the right word?
Well, this student's understanding was that the philosophy is presented as a whole, but that we are meant to take everything that we hear and apply it to our own sense of reason and check it and test it against everything else we've ever learned. And we don't just accept it simply because it comes as some whole part of some authority.
There are no authorities in this. The secret
That bears
doctrine,
restating.
no, there are no authorities.
Thank you.
You are your own authority. The secret doctrine and Isis Unveiled, Voice of the Silence, the Gita, the Mr. Judge's writings, Ocean, and so forth are all a comprehensive whole. And RC actually gives the practical application of it. And here's the statement made in one of those articles. He said, the leaders or the prominent leaders of the Theosophical movement moved the philosophy away from its core, thereby doing a tremendous harm to humanity, because what they have put out there is not the real, but it is pseudo thought coming from their own brains, in other words. Which scientists can tell you what they do in these states that we just talked about? Which scientists can go in and abstract or collect what they need to collect from the mind field and bring it down here to solve problems? Which one of them know that these states exist? Whatever decision you make for yourself, you're welcome to do it, because you are an independent human being and you can make your own judgments about things. But remember, the wisdom of the ages is not the brainchild of a single person. It is the wisdom of the ages that has been tested, retested, and retested for thousands and thousands of years by masters of wisdom. These are perfected men.
But
in the
we're
Voice of the
expected to
Silence,
test
it
that
says
ourselves,
that
right?
they have become part of that light they are part of the Dayan Chohans. They go up and down
Right,
that
but
scale.
that testing is something that we're supposed to continue to do.
For yourself,
We don't.
yes?
My point, I guess, is that if we accept it as a whole, that diminishes the importance of our discriminating faculties.
Not at all. All the parts that fit into a beautiful building are made to fit into that beautiful building. Take one part out, then the whole structure will collapse. You are very welcome, or in fact, they say never to accept anything at face value. What you cannot learn by what it is, you may learn by what it is not. So
Agreed.
that is
Agreed, but-
available to
but
every
the
student.
building analogy, though, I accept that the building is a beautiful whole unto itself. But if you were to build another building, you need to understand the nature of every single part of that building and understand how it fits together with every other part. You cannot just imagine that you can create a whole building out of nothing on its own. So
Well-
the building stands. Theosophy as an entire philosophy stands on its own. But our experience of it and our understanding of it comes from taking every single piece and understanding what that piece means and how it fits in with the rest, not just accepting the entire thing as a whole.
No one
Otherwise,
is,
that's
is
dogma.
telling you to accept it as it is.
Dogma is to accept something as a whole or to
This is
accept
not
none of it.
dogma, because
Yes,
you
it
have
is.
to make it a living power in yourself. And that only comes when you understand what the words mean. They don't mean what it is written on that book. That is a mantramic book. It has an inner meaning. And she tells you that just as the Bible is read in between words, so you can do the same thing with that. Because there are missing parts in that book that you have to supply in order to really understand it.
Well,
Yeah.
from listening to this question and answer, I don't see the difference in what either one of you are saying. I think that you're saying the same thing in different ways, because I think what the student behind me said started off saying seemed to be different than what he ended up saying. And what he ended up saying was that if you have a house, then you need to understand each block in the house, each section of the house, in order to understand the house, in order to see the intricate parts of the whole.
I got that.
That does not negate that the house exists as a whole. It says that as a student or as a house mechanic, that you need to understand each part before you can address the whole.
Okay.
So, what I hear you saying is the whole stands in and of itself. It is there for you to investigate,
That's right.
okay,
And understand.
and understand
And apply.
and apply. And
Ah.
it is and you can't change any of its intricate parts. It is what it is. It's for you to understand it.
Assimilate
I
it.
don't see any difference
Okay, thank you.
between those two perspectives.
Okay.
Now I want to move on to my question.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the consciousness level or the consciousness experience in the deep sleep where there is no dream?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
The consciousness level
Mm-hmm.
or consciousness state of the deep sleep
Mm-hmm.
stage
Mm-hmm.
of consciousness.
You want me to talk about the deep sleep consciousness?
I understood that we have a waking consciousness.
Yes.
And we have a dreaming consciousness. That there's a
Yeah.
consciousness that goes on when we dream.
Yep.
And we have a sleepless dream consciousness.
Dreamless sleep.
Dreamless sleep.
Correct.
Could you talk about that consciousness?
Okay.
That dreamless sleeping consciousness.
Okay. The sleeping period is divided into two sections, and I read a little bit as to what Mr. Judge said about the insufficiency of the English words. In the first part, you're going from the dreaming state into the sleep state. But when you go into the dreamless part, the ego lives its own life on that level of spiritual consciousness that I was going to say exhibits, but no, lives would be the right word, lives at that particular level of consciousness, remembering that the spiritual consciousness is also in sevens. Now, you're asking this student with her limited knowledge basis to talk about the states that you pass into when you are in the highest spiritual levels of your consciousness. And she calls it turiya. Nowhere has it been explained as to what it is.
Banquet of the gods. That's a reference that you at the banquet of the gods.
Yeah, she told us that we commune with the gods, even the criminal does. But the ego lives its life on those levels of spiritual existence.
And you're saying that as
That it's real life.
as individuals that we experience that state
We do.
every 24 hours.
We do. We do.
I have a question.
Yeah.
There are some human beings that are not capable of experiencing the dreamless sleep because of all kind of interruptions. They just don't go to that state.
There are some human beings who do not experience dreamless sleep.
It's not in every human being
Well,
that can go that deep.
If you were really materialistic but good, my understanding would say that they experience some part of it. But if you're wicked, if you're constantly occupied with evil doing, consciously evil, what happens to that human being? That it's a totally and completely different subject, but I'll come back to you.
Well, that would be cut. It would be cut off.
Yeah, you're cutting yourself from the higher ego.
But what about the criminal? As you stated earlier, they do get some sort of reprieve, you know.
Yeah,
Because they
but everybody is not evil.
Yeah.
You can experience tremendous rage, and during that rage, where is your consciousness? Where have you gone? Come up.
I think the previous question refers to like a medical condition where their sleep cycle is interrupted because of perhaps apnea or something like that. I don't think we're talking, she's necessarily, she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was more along the lines of for those individuals who have trouble sleeping through the night consistently, they don't enter into that dreamless state. The studies have proven this. What is that effect on them? I think
Because
is
the
that-
dreamless state is the deepest level of sleeping, which not necessarily every one of us will go to. It's not something that you decide on. It's just interruptions from the physical world, the medical problems, or
Well,
different things.
Here it is. She says, and I read it to you, that everyone goes through all of these states if the higher ego is still present in the individual. In other words, if we have, through persistent evil doing and persistently ignoring that aspect of life or denying it, the affinity of the human soul has lost it and it severs itself from the human soul. That can happen. Then we would definitely not experience those levels. But here it is. I found it, Dupree. She says, they are the source of all theologies, this is stuff, as of all the revelations and visions which result in sects and sectarianism. All are pathological in that the perception of the seer fails to yield him the true character and significance of what he sees and hears. That was the sleepwalking that you were talking about. There's your answer to it. So this is all the time we have. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
This descends. This ascends. This always.
No, you are the. Okay, go ahead.
know, if okay, now ego is mean. Is an ego ego. It's only Greek when you sleep. Those three principles, those three consciousness.
If you haven't developed it, that's true. You can develop that. That's all. They reach that state. Control that, all those stuff. They're in it.
Right.
As you mentioned, were finding the importance of being healthy and being or not being healthy. That's another reason that it's
Jealousy, greed, everything.
And it corresponds to us.
I'm gonna show you something right now. That this is a plus.
Right.
Later on. Right.
By purpose or otherwise, so what you do here is going to access the higher up. I'm sure it does. What we cannot see. It's really our spiritual conditions of like they say, we become we're going to align yourself with the higher up. So that
like 3 hours a week.
but they say all you do is remain healthy
and as you grow in that ability, more and more of the higher aspect will see.
which is the dreamless.
So
The
this
rest
is
is like preliminary conditions that you can just rock and party
Just
on.
keep going forward. Quickly, just to show you.
You did a good job. You're very clear. It's very good. It's very,
I thought, okay,
it's very good. Yeah, it's very, it was very good. Very,
emotions are my friend.
yeah.
Other things I was overcoming, difficult things in life, it's all there. We all go through it.
Right.
You have the power to do it.
How do you control this?
So you said before you sleep, you control it before you sleep with your thoughts.
During the day you can do something. This is what it has learned to say. I really do. When it says this person is that who am I to be in charge of that person? Be quiet. I tell him all the time, he's not really good because we all have it and it interjects itself. Because that personality is not quiet altogether.
Just keep poking, baby.
You have to, I want you to go and talk to this gentleman.
Yes.
Terry?
I know Derek.
I
It's good to see you. Yeah, I've been away on my job for a while.
I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah.
You know what your class is?
I got to wondering what was going on with you. He's always seems to worry, so I really